This is an AQA Psychology GCSE revision video for Paper 1, Memory, with a specific focus on the second key study of the memory topic, which is Bartlett's War of the Ghost study. So to be able to describe a study in psychology, you have to be able to include the aim, procedure or method, findings or results, and conclusion. So you have to be able to report and complete these sentences about Bartlett's War of the Ghost study, because it is a key study, which means you could be given a 9-mark question, something like describe and evaluate Bartlett's War of the Ghost study, or it could just say describe and evaluate Bartlett's study. So it's really important you know the aim of Bartlett's study, the method that he used, what he found out, and what you can conclude from his study. So does his study link to any theories in psychology in the memory topic? Does it support a theory or does it contradict a theory? And so that's what we're going to be looking at in this video. So let's begin with Bartlett's procedure. So in Bartlett's War of the Ghost study, his aim was to see how memories are reconstructed, and to do this, he used 20 participants from a university in the UK. The participants were told a story called The War of the Ghosts, which I am just highlighting now in yellow. War of the Ghost story, and the story is here, this which I'm boxing right now in yellow. So if you'd like to pause the video and have a little read of the story, in 5 seconds, I'll continue with the procedure. So the 20 participants were told this story and they were asked to recall the story 15 minutes later. They had to recall the story to another participant. So that's represented by these images here of the same cartoon person. So after 15 minutes of hearing the story, they then had to recall it to another person, to another participant, and it became like a game of Chinese whispers. So you hear the story, you pass it on, next person passes the story on, so on and so forth. This is called the serial reproduction technique. And so then afterwards, all of the participants, all of the 20 participants, were then asked to recall the story after a few days, weeks, months, and years. What Bartlett found is that participants remembered fragments, so little pieces of the story. Rather than the whole story and everything that took place, they remembered bits and pieces of the story, and each time they retold it, they retold it with small changes based on what they had expected to happen in the story and not what actually happened. He also found that the story became shorter the more it was reproduced. So that is a bit like Chinese whispers. You know, the game is that you whisper in someone's ear and often information gets lost because it's so quiet and the message being passed gets shorter and shorter. That's, of course, because the person can't necessarily hear what's being said. But in Bartlett's study, the story got shorter the more it was reproduced, simply because people couldn't remember everything about the story. And then some phrases were changed based on participants' cultures. So people had social or cultural expectations. For example, the word canoe was in the story, but students actually recalled hearing the word boat in the story. So they changed that to be more in line with their cultural expectations, because as British people or people from the United Kingdom would expect the word boat to be used in conversations or in stories more than canoe, unless you're being very specific. So in conclusion, Bartlett found that people remember only fragments of memories and will reconstruct their memory based on what they expect. So their expectations could be due to social or cultural expectations, for example, the whole canoe and boat difference. Now, Bartlett's study can also be used when evaluating the multi-store model. If you think about using Scout to evaluate theories, the multi-store model can be criticised using Bartlett's study, and it can be a piece of contradictory evidence, so the C in Scout. And the reason that is if you have a look at one of the particular findings, that participants remembered fragments of the story. Now you can use that as a weakness of the multi-store model, because the multi-store model suggests that information goes into your long-term memory and can stay there forever, and it can be really detailed and hold on to all pieces of information as long as you've rehearsed it and it's transferred into your long-term memory. Now this study shows exactly the opposite, that actually people hold on to the meaning of things but not the massive detail. So you can use this study as a piece of evidence against the multi-store model. Moving on to what we mean by reconstructive memory, because Bartlett's study can be used to support the reconstructive theory of memory, which is the theory of memory that you will need to know. Another theory, an opposing theory to the multi-store model, is the reconstructive memory. And this is the idea that fragments of stored information are put back together, they're reassembled, and the gaps get filled in by our expectations so that we make a story that makes sense. So we don't remember every single piece of information that we ever see or hear, or, all of your five senses. Often we reassemble that information, we piece it back together, and that picture that we piece back together might not always be a correct picture. For example, remembering the word boat instead of canoe. So moving on to the final part of the video, having an opportunity to grave Bartlett's War of the Ghost study. Reminder of what GRAVE stands for is here, and some questions to help you apply GRAVE to Bartlett's study is here. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to pause the video, and in 5 seconds I will go through some support for GRAVE. Okay, so for generalisability, if we are thinking about the fact that participants were from Cambridge University in England, could you generalise those findings? Could you say that everyone that's not from Cambridge University, or not from England would behave in the same way? Secondly, Bartlett did not use a standardised procedure, so he did not make the experience the same for each participant. He might have just sort of rocked up on the day and been a bit last minute. And with some participants, he might have been really clear and explained what they need to do in a detailed way. So does that mean his study could be replicated? And if it can't, what does that mean for the reliability of his findings? Now, for application, this study supports Bartlett's own theory of reconstructive memory. And reconstructive memory is really important because actually it demonstrates that eyewitnesses, people that witness crimes, aren't actually reliable. So what they recall happening isn't always true. And so eyewitness testimonies aren't relied on as much now because we have things like DNA. And it's due to the reconstructive theory of memory that shows people's memories aren't as accurate as they think they are. So has this research by Bartlett benefited society in any way? And you'd explain that for your evaluation point. Moving on to validity, it took place in a lab setting, so participants weren't in their natural environments. As students, they weren't in a natural university classroom where they might usually be, or even at home. So do you think that they would have performed better or worse if they were in a natural environment? And have a think about why. And then finally, for ethics, there are absolutely no ethical issues with Bartlett's study. So even though that's a strength that there's no ethical concerns, you can't use it as an evaluation point because it's not a strength or a weakness. All research in psychology should be ethical, and so you can't sort of praise Bartlett for not being unethical. So have a go at answering those questions, and in 5 seconds I will go through the answers. So here we go. Generalizability is of course a weakness because we can't say for sure that others would behave in the same way. Bartlett specifically used students, and so we can't generalize it to anyone that's a bit older than students, middle-aged people, or even like nursery school students, because he used university students, so not generalizable. Another weakness is that he didn't use his standardised procedures, so he didn't make sure that the study was carried out the same way for everyone, which means each participant had a different experience, which could have led to participants not knowing what's required of them, and so it makes it difficult for others to replicate the study, so it has low reliability. But if we go back to this point about participants not knowing what's required of them, that could be the reason the story they recalled wasn't as accurate, and it could be nothing to do with Bartlett's theory of reconstructive memory. Application is a clear strength for Bartlett because it's been very useful to society, and it stops people going to prison for crimes they haven't committed. And in the past, some people, for example, Ronald Cotton, if you wanted to Google him, have ended up in prison serving time for crimes they didn't commit because of an inaccurate eyewitness and their reconstructive memory, their memory piecing fragments back together and it being completely inaccurate. So this study is really useful in society to show that memory is not like the multi-store model suggests. Memory is not long-term, lasts forever, every detail is always remembered accurately. And then finally, we have another weakness, and that is because participants might not have acted naturally. If they knew they were taking part in a study, they might have displayed demand characteristics. So they might have deliberately not recalled the study very well, or tried really hard to remember everything about the study. And so their behaviour isn't natural, and that can affect Bartlett's results. So just a reminder that in an exam, if you are given a 9-mark essay question, you only need 2 strong PEC paragraphs. And so I would strongly recommend you go with the generalisability or the lack of generalisability in Bartlett's study, and then this nice strength of how it supports the theory of reconstructive memory and how useful that is for eyewitnesses. And you can also include that reference to Ronald Cotton if you choose to look him up. So that is the end of the video. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it useful.